Hey everybody. So this is something that I've wanted to talk about since it came out, but I just haven't had the chance to do any videos on. NBC has released their TV schedule for the United States for the NHL for this upcoming season. And for this particular video, I just want to look at October. But quickly, before we get into this, I just want to say, if you're not yet a subscriber to this channel, please hit that subscribe button. As long as you're a fan of hockey and a fan of the NHL, there are videos here for you. Whether you follow a certain team or you follow the league as a whole, there is content on this channel that you will enjoy. So please hit that subscribe button. Alright, October. Beginning of October, we are all pumped to finally have hockey back. Everyone wants to watch hockey that's a hockey fan. We want to watch as many games as we can. After months of not being able to watch anything, we finally get our favorite sport back. And NBC really put out a lackluster TV schedule for the month of October. I don't think it's that great. They do a decent number of games, but a lot of the matchups just don't get me excited. They're not games that I really want to watch. Now, part of that isn't NBC's fault. Some of these games that I'll put the schedule up in a second. Some of these games are you're forced into this being the TV game because the NHL doesn't put that many marquee matchups that early on in the season. The NHL wants their best games, their division rival games, their really good rivalry matchups, things like that. Games that between teams that could be right next to each other in the standings. They want those towards the end of the season. They want those games being in February, March, and April, not in October and November. So NBC's hands were tied a little bit as far as how good of the matchups they could put on TV during this first month are. But man, some of these games just aren't great. So another thing is NBC has ditched Wednesday night rivalry. Now, Tuesday and Wednesday are still the main nights that NBC airs games. They also have some random Fridays mixed in there, and then as you get later in the season, there are a lot of Monday games as well. That basically starts coming in January and later when once the NFL regular season ends and Monday Night Football is over, the NHL hops in and has a decent number of games on NBCSN on Monday nights. Also, once football season ends, you'll start to get Sunday afternoon NBC games that everyone really talks about a lot and are really marquee games. Overall, I went ahead and looked at the schedule and looked into December, January, and February, and the matchups get much, much better later in the season. The NBC schedule for later in the year is fine. It's fantastic. The matchups are much better. There are a lot of really, really good games on that I want to watch. But this video, I'm focusing on October because October is what we're closest to. That's when hockey comes back. We're all extremely excited to have it back. We want to watch games, and a lot of these games just aren't great. So let's start with opening night, October 3rd. This is fine. This is fantastic. We have Boston versus Washington. That's great. And then Anaheim versus San Jose. Anytime any of the California teams play, I want to watch that. I have nothing wrong with that. My first big problem comes on the next night, Thursday, October 4th. The first game that night is Nashville versus the New York Rangers. Yes, the New York Rangers, who are going to absolutely stink this year, versus the Nashville Predators. They're not even in the same conference. Happening on the same night, only half an hour earlier, almost the same time, is Pittsburgh versus Washington. One of the best rivalries of the last 15 years in the NHL. A game that everyone loves to watch and wants to see. And NBC doesn't show Pittsburgh and Washington. They show Nashville versus the New York Rangers. The lousy New York Rangers. And then the nightcap that night is another cross-conference game, which this one wasn't NBC's fault. The only late game that night was this game and this cross-conference matchup of Philadelphia versus Vegas, which is fine. That'll be a decent enough game. Two good teams there. But I cannot get over the fact that they did not put on national TV Pittsburgh versus Washington, Crosby versus Ovechkin, playoff matchup for the last 3 years. They don't put that on TV for Nashville versus the Rangers. And I don't know about you guys, and I'll get into this more in the Wednesday Night Rivalry video I'm going to record right after this. I don't want to watch boring games. And cross-conference games generally are boring games. Not all the time, but usually. There's no history between the teams. They're not rivals. They play each other twice a year. It's not like they're heated matchups. There's very little intensity most of the time. They're usually boring games. I do not want to watch boring games like that. I want division matchups and conference matchups between teams that really don't like each other, teams that are going to play intense, physical, nasty hockey, and put on entertaining games. There's a reason that when Anaheim and LA play, people want to watch. There's a reason that when Boston and Montreal play and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh play, people want to watch. People don't want to watch Pittsburgh play, St. Louis. That's not a rivalry matchup. And I'll get into all of this when in the next video. But NBC needs to be putting on games that people want to watch. And quite frankly, Nashville versus New York is not a matchup that gets me excited. That game is probably going to put people to sleep. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe something wild happens. Maybe it's like a 6-5 game and there's like 5 fights. Who knows? But I highly doubt it. The games like that usually happen between division rivals, not teams that play each other twice a year. The only thing that really stood out from cross-conference matchups last year was the brawl that Detroit and Calgary had. That was it. Nothing else really stood out. But anyway, moving on. October 9th, we have San Jose versus Philly, another cross-conference game. But at least that's 2 good teams. It should be a decent game. October 10th, Vegas versus Washington. That's a matchup of last year's Stanley Cup Final. I have absolutely no problem with that being on national TV. That's going to be a great game. October 16th, Arizona versus Minnesota. Are you kidding me? Arizona versus Minnesota. That's really going to get the ratings to jump up. Oh my God, who wants to watch that? At least they're in the same conference, but talk about a game that's probably going to be extremely boring. Then the next night you have the Rangers versus Washington. Fine, okay, that's great. Finally, at least you got a good division rivalry game there. And then Boston versus Calgary, which is a cross-conference matchup, but should be a decent game. And you have 2 more physical teams there. That should be a decent one to watch. Then on October 19th, you have Minnesota versus Dallas. That's fantastic. That is those are division rivals that do not like each other. Those are the kind of games that I want to see. Then the 23rd, you have San Jose versus Nashville. Great. 2 playoff teams from last year. That's a game that I want to see. The next night, the 24th, you have Toronto versus Winnipeg. Not the best matchup, but you have Matthews versus Laine. 2 Canadian teams. 2 very good teams that I will definitely watch that game. Then later, the nightcap that night's Tampa Bay versus Colorado. That's very eh. And finally, 10:30, October 30th, you have Vegas versus Nashville. That's another great game. So they do have some very good games mixed in this schedule, but they also have some that I'm just like, oh, how is that of all matchups the national TV game? I don't get it. In some cases, their hands are tied. They're either limited with the number of games that are on that night, or maybe that whole night is a lot of cross-conference matchups. The NHL tries to get a lot of those cross-conference games done early, so they can have the division and conference games. The Pittsburgh versus Philly, the Boston versus Buffalo. Those games tend to come later in the year. Boston versus Toronto, I think you'll see a lot of later in the year. So the NHL does tend to have a lesser exciting schedule at the beginning of the year. Get those games out of the way and save your marquee stuff for February, March, and April. But October is an important month too, because everyone by October is dying to have hockey back. And we want to watch really good, I want to watch really good games when hockey comes back, and some of these just aren't great games. So opening night's fantastic, but the next night's a bit of a letdown for me. Some of these matchups are really good. Minnesota versus Dallas is going to be fantastic. Vegas versus Washington is going to be fantastic. The Rangers versus Washington, that's going to be a good division matchup, even though the Rangers aren't very good. At least there's some rivalry between those teams. San Jose versus Nashville, that will be good. But some of these games just leave a lot to be desired. Some of that's NBC's fault. They picked the wrong game to show. Others, it's just the way the schedule is, and that's what they had to choose from. But anyway, luckily, as the season goes on, the NBC national TV schedule gets better and better. And certainly by like January and February, we're getting really, really good national TV games. So we're just going to have to wait a little bit for that marquee stuff that we all really, really want to see. But let me know what you guys think of the schedule down in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are in the description below. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I got a video coming up I'm recording right after this about Wednesday Night Rivalry and how NBC is doing away with that. And so definitely, if you're interested in the schedule stuff and my opinion on the schedule and how NBC does covering the sport, check that one out. And I'll talk to you guys soon, very soon, coming right up.